Hare Krishna and good evening, dear devotees. Thank you for being with us. We have our third episode of Many Moons podcast, and tonight we are very fortunate to have Rukmini Devidasi with us, and she will be discussing the topic of valuing Vaishnavi voices.
Hare Krishna, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us and supporting us, and for all your lovely comments. And like Sharadia just mentioned, we're very, very grateful for Rukmini Walker for joining us today, all the way from Washington, D.C. Some of you may or may not know Rukmini Prabhu, along with her son Gauravani, this famous musician, some of you may or may not know, has led groups to India, traveling to holy places and also teaching bhakti yoga for many years. Alongside that, Rukmini and her husband has also chaired Vaishnava, Christian and Muslim dialogues for many years, both in Washington DC and in India. She is also a member of the Sabha, or the government body of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and she is also the founder of the Urban Devi Initiative, which is a community of women that gather both online and in person to explore and excavate their identities as urban women living the spiritual life. So, welcome to the session, Rukmini Prabhu. We're very, very grateful that you are here with us today. And before we get going, I believe Rukmini wants to have a little offering, want to do a little offering of prayer. So the floor is all yours, Prabhu.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for inviting me. I wanted to begin with this beautiful prayer of Prahlad Maharaj from Srimad Bhagavatam. The world is in such a suffering condition right now. So I thought this prayer is so broad and inclusive, and it's a prayer for all living beings. I'll chant the prayer in Sanskrit and then I'll give it to you in English. Swasyastu visvasya kalo prasidatam dhanyantu bhutani shivam mito diya manascha badram bhajata radhoksaje aveshatam no matirapya hoituki. May the entire universe be blessed with peace and good hope. May everyone driven by envy and enmity become pacified and reconciled. May all living beings develop abiding concern for the welfare of others. May our own hearts and minds be filled with purity and serenity. May all these blessings flow naturally from this supreme benediction. May our attention become spontaneously absorbed in the rapture of pure love unto the transcendent Lord. Thank you so much.
Jai, thank you so much for that lovely prayer, and that was such an apt prayer, for the time, the current turbulence times that we are all going through at the moment. So thank you very much for that beautiful, beautiful offering. And our first question to you is, like I mentioned earlier, many people would know you for being the founder of, particularly the ladies joining us today for the Urban Devi Initiative. So, why did you start this initiative, Prabhu?
I started the Urban Devi Collective for the purpose of uplifting the voices of the unheard voices of the Vaishnavis. I really feel that if we miss the opportunity to hear the voices of over half the population of our ISKCON communities, then we impoverish our community, we impoverish the greater society, and we impoverish our future as well. So that's my purpose, that's my vision.
On your Urban Devi site, Rukmini Prabhu, you mentioned that one of your goals is to empower the voices of the Vaishnavis. So could you explain to us and share with us, what do you mean with empowering the Vaishnavis? What does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question because, you know, usually when we hear about women's empowerment, they're talking about financial empowerment or parity of pay or smashing the proverbial glass ceiling. But to me, spiritual empowerment is about helping ourselves and helping each other remove the obstacles and smooth the path so that women living in the path of bhakti can rise by their own extraordinary qualities and by divine grace that really no mundane force can ever stop. Um, you know, one of the qualities of a dharmic life lived in the mode of goodness is transparency, to begin to hear some guidance from within, to become little by little, to become more transparent to the will of Krishna. And the Krishna sun begins to clear away the fog and the confusion of the mind and heart. You know, we have this experience sometimes we see in the morning when the sun rises, the fog begins to just dissipate. And when we try to strive to live an authentic life of bhakti, then Krishna's grace can descend to enlighten and empower and show us the way forward in using our own God-given gifts for his pleasure. And then I also feel that when we're enriched by loving and encouraging voices of Vaishnavi sisters, then we can empower each other and our own selves to, again, rise up to receive that descending grace. So I feel it's like a reciprocation. It's like a rising up by dharmic good qualities, but then to receive that descending grace of Bhakti Devi. So, you know, I was thinking that if you're not feeling, you know, that appreciation and encouragement from other Vaishnavis, then what's the solution? Then reach out to encourage someone else, and you'll see that encouragement will circle back to you. And I believe that this is the mood of Bhakti. Bhakti Devi is herself a goddess. She's an expansion of Radharani. Srila Prabhupada once wrote that to me in a letter. I asked him, who is Bhakti Devi? Because I saw a picture that said Bhakti Devi, and I was wondering. And so, yeah, this is her mood. This is the mood of Bhakti Devi, the mood of Radharani, the mood of love, compassion, and empathy. So, yeah, I feel like it's that reciprocation of rising up by good qualities and to access that divine grace coming down. Thank you.
Thank you, Rukmini Prabhu. I think that's an extraordinary definition of women's spiritual empowerment. And what I really appreciate about it, and I think what makes it distinctly different from, I would say, like a secular idea of, you know, women's empowerment, is that two things. The one is that it is actually a process of just connecting with the mercy, you know, the mercy of Radharani as Bhakti Devi, the mercy of Krishna. So it is actually a process of connecting and then, you know, kind of coming into what we are supposed to be. And then that it's also it's an inherently integrated process. You don't become empowered by yourself, but you become empowered as part of the community. And your empowerment then should be used in service of others. So I think that's very beautiful, because sometimes, as you said, a secular view of women's empowerment can be this. I know there's this phrase now, a boss babe, you know, a woman that is just, you know, very successfully financially in business and living a life of luxury. And that is so different from what you're describing now, becoming an instrument, you know, of Krishna's mercy and, you know, stepping into who you're supposed to be. I know, I think Dee also wanted to share some thoughts.
Yes, it was a beautiful response. Thank you. But the whole thing about you setting up Urban Davy initiative to empower women, the meaning behind the initiative I thought was very interesting. Urban and Davy is a very interesting juxtaposition. So, if I may ask, what made you think, for such a beautiful movement, for such a beautiful initiative, what made you pick the words urban Davy, because those are not two words you see often that's close together.
It's really funny because one of my godbrothers, I'll mention his name, Satyaraj, he's a scholar, and he came into the Bhakti Center once, and he's always very cheeky. And he said, actually, Rukmini is the original urban Devi, but Radharani is the rural Devi. So you should really be calling it rural Devi. But, it was just a way of approaching women, contemporary women. I mean, the focus is contemporary women, uplifting the voices of contemporary women of the 21st century. And how does bhakti translate into the 21st century, into our Western environments. And yeah, I think that's really important.
Thank you.
I really like that idea that Rukmini Devi was the original urban Devi. But I think also one interesting thing that should be mentioned is again in our, I mean, that's not in secular culture, but in popular culture, there is this idea, of women needing to be a goddess or embodying the goddess, and there's like goddess workshops and retreats, and I find that quite fascinating. But I think again the difference is, if we look at the Vaishnava tradition, if we look at our goddesses, for instance Saraswati Devi, is a goddess. If we look at Ganga Devi, they are goddesses, and certainly they do have some of those glamorous characteristics as their beauty, but they're all servants of Krishna as well. And I think that's the core of those goddesses' identities.
Yes.
They might be glamorous, but whatever they are using that energy that they have, that position that they have, in service of Krishna.
Yes, it's so interesting. While you both are, mentioning these brilliant thoughts and questions, I keep thinking Dee is in the UK, and I'm thinking of this beautiful quote from Shakespeare that I love, where he says, "The quality of mercy is not strained; it falleth as the gentle rain from heaven." And then he mentions something that quality of mercy, when it's in the character of a great king, it's more beautiful than his crown. He may be wearing a jeweled crown, but that quality of mercy is more beautiful. So yeah, you're talking about glamorous goddesses, and I think that's, people like to extract something outside of the tradition and misunderstand. I think bhakti's become sort of a buzzword, and it's really misunderstood. But when we understand it, according to the roots of the tradition, as handed down so beautifully, hand to hand, like a luscious, delectable fruit that can't be thrown from the top of the tree, then it's understood with so much more grace, and given by grace and received in humility. And these are the self-effulgent qualities that begin to shine when someone begins to practice that authentic bhakti. So I find that beautiful.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think I can now meditate upon a goddess as as someone that is handing down the fruits of bhakti, and distributing the fruits of bhakti in so many ways. And I think if we think about a Devi in that context, even if we do feel we resonate with this archetype of the goddess, it's very different. Being a conduit for the divine, that's a
Yes.
very different that's a very
Yeah.
different form of
And,
being a
and
goddess.
yes, and it's a big difference between Shrimati Radharani and Kali or Durga, these fierce goddesses that have their weapons ready to pierce us with the miseries of this world. Radharani is about that descending grace and about compassion and empathy, and sharing her love. She just wants to share her love with us, and uplift us with mercy. So it's a very different mood. She's the spiritual divine goddess rather than the goddesses of this world who are, ready to poke us with those spears of sufferings.
Yes, no, it's I think that's one of the things that makes our tradition very unique is the nature of both Krishna and Radharani, and how their compassionate nature, I think, is their paramount quality, is that softness, that kindness, that love that they have, and that eagerness that they have to reconnect all of us
Yeah.
with them. But not
I
to,
like the idea that, at the very center of all existence, there's this love affair between Radha and Krishna. Such a beautiful thing. And that, that we're part of that love, that we're the kids. They are our origin. And we're born out of that love. Just like, the material world is a reflection, right? So just like an ordinary family, maybe a couple falls in love and they want to have kids and they want to share their love and they want to see, does this baby have daddy's nose and mommy's eyes, So we're born out of that love, and we have their characteristics when we practice their their wisdom, and those characteristics can uplift the world. Yeah.
I think Sharadi is frozen. Is it just for me or?
She looks a little frozen.
Yeah, that's fine. So another question we had was actually, why do you think so? You obviously value the importance of Vaishnavi voices. So why do you think it's actually important to value and uplift it? What do you see the benefit of actually uplifting the importance of the voices of women?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Because I feel like the perspectives of women are very different from those of men, and that our society is enriched by a diversity of voices, and that our society becomes crippled by a monoculture that really disregards the voices of the women. I wanted to share with you that I spent the last few days at an eco village on the American island of Puerto Rico, and it's called Plenitude, and the farmers there, as a matter of fact, are mostly women, and they enrich the soil by alternating the crops with each planting, using maybe you've heard of biodiversity. So they're alternating the crops, and they found that when one crop is grown repeatedly in the same soil, that as a monocrop, then the land becomes depleted and harmful insects come to invade the soil. So in the same way, when a monoculture of only men's voices are heard and valued in society, and when the voices of the women are silenced or remain unheard, then that harmful silence, I believe this very strongly, that harmful silence actually opens the door for children to be abused and for women themselves to be abused. So I think it's very important that we have that biodiversity of voices and not a monoculture of voices. So Saradi is back. You're back.
Yeah.
Good.
She is back. But no, that's a very important point. And, appreciating the fact that, we need to empower voices and that adds to like the biodiversity, diversity in the society. Why do you think Vaishnavis in particular are sometimes hesitant to share their thoughts with, whether this be in open forums or give class? Why do you think there is that hesitance?
Yes. Researchers have found that in classrooms of mixed men and women, in classrooms, and we see this in our own Srimad Bhagavatam classes in the temple, women tend to be hesitant to speak. They may feel ashamed that they may say the wrong thing or sound foolish, or it may not come out just right, or they may feel that they're being judged as less intelligent or maybe with nothing useful to contribute. And, we also may be making those unfair assumptions about ourselves also, maybe because of some past experience of feeling dismissed or some kind of verbal abuse or some kind of shaming in our past. Or we may have our own or even other stereotyped ideas that women have nothing valuable to contribute and that they should just be quiet. Of course, we have to take into account that we come from different cultures, so we should also be aware of those cultural differences. But I think very often, if we listen deeply without judgment, without making assumptions, we can often learn more from those who feel hesitant to share and speak. And, our bhakti process is about hearing, first of all, right? Shravanam, hearing, comes before kirtanam, doesn't it? So deep listening is transformative, both for the speaker and for the one who's hearing. And, if diverse voices are honored, we can just learn so much more from that unheard perspective. And, I believe we're supposed to be personalists. And our culture is really enriched by honoring unheard voices, and honoring the personhood of each and every person. And I think that this could really be a transformative culture of radical personalism. I love this term, radical personalism. Just by deep listening and uplifting those who feel hesitant to speak. There's a nice quote from the Dalai Lama. He said, when we speak, we're only repeating what we already know. But when we listen, we may learn something new. So, it's an interesting point that women, even biologically, this is really interesting. Even biologically, women are wired to feel more compassion than most men, unless we harden our hearts and stuff those feelings down. I wonder if you've ever heard they've done studies in these neonatal nurseries in hospitals, and if one baby cries, then the heads of all the little girl babies, they all turn in the direction of that crying sound, but not the boys.
That's very, very interesting.
Isn't that interesting? The boys are somehow oblivious to that. So I find that just so amazing. So I think we need to empower our bhakti culture with a mood of radical compassion, radical personalism, caring deeply for ourselves and each other, and that this would be a spiritual empowerment that would uplift us all. They say that the rising tide lifts all ships. So when I try to empower myself and try to empower others in my community, in my circle, then the whole culture becomes uplifted. So I find that really important.
It's really, yeah, that's a very interesting point you made. It's about, not just one person uplifting, it's just uplifting each other, isn't it? And the power of the many is often far greater than even one individual very strong person. And what was, I know you're very, very lucky, and you've done lots of good shakriti to be a direct disciple of Srila Prabhupada himself. So, what was your experience with Prabhupada, with this connection, with regards to with this around this topic around empowering women? Did you see that he actually valued the voices of Vaishnavis and their unique individual contributions?
Yes, there's so many beautiful stories that we don't often hear. One story I love. There was a woman in the early 70s. Her name was Mula Prakriti. She's no longer with us. She's no longer living. But she was one of the top book distributors in Los Angeles when this big wave of book distribution began. And Srila Prabhupada was so pleased with her service. He called her into his room, and he wanted to hear about what the people were saying when they received the books and what was she telling them. And so she had this lovely conversation with Srila Prabhupada. And at that time, Srila Prabhupada told her, he said, yes, the women, the Vaishnavis in this movement are Lord Chaitanya's secret weapons for spreading his mission, which I find so beautiful. And he told her a really charming story at that time. So he told her this story that he remembered in Calcutta, where he was raised, that some company was marketing a type of oil for the hair called Brahmi hair oil. I think you can still get it actually.
I've
And he
heard of it, Brahmi hair. I don't know why. Maybe I'm thinking things, or seen it in Holland and Barrett or something. I don't know.
right, right. So it was really interesting. He told her this story that they came up with this, marketing method that they found these. He said very cultured, respectable young ladies, and even though this Brahmi hair oil it was not proved to be effective in any way. There was no medical proof for it being effective, but they were wildly successful because they hired these respectable, lovely young ladies who would go and knock on people's door and tell them about this Brahmi hair oil, because Prabhupada was explaining that in the Kali Yuga, people are very afraid to open their door for a man. But when there's a respectable young lady, they're happy to open their door. So in this way, he was explaining that this is Lord Chaitanya's secret weapon, the Vaishnavis spreading his mission. And, when Srila Prabhupada first went back to India in 1970, and he brought his Western disciples, it created such a gigantic uproar in India, all over India. And Yamuna Devi was leading the kirtans, Himavati was giving the public lectures, and both in front of masses of people. And of course, Yamuna Devi was also worshiping the deities on stage at the Pandal festivals, and these gigantic Pandal festivals with 25,000 people in these major cities of India. So I think Srila Prabhupada did this to really amaze the people of India with his Western disciples, and perhaps especially amaze them with his women disciples. And of course, later in the conservative atmosphere of Vrindavan, he felt that their values should be respected, and men began to publicly perform the services of worship of pujari. But in Calcutta, Narayani was the pujari for many, many years. I wanted to share a beautiful story that I love that also happened in India. There's one god sister of mine, Kausalya, and she's brilliant and talented. And she memorized the entire Ishopanishad. And Srila Prabhupada had her speak the Ishopanishad in front of this massive audience one evening. And he was so pleased. She chanted the whole Ishopanishad from memory. And he was so pleased with her. He said, come here, come here. And she came, and he was on his Vyasasan. And she went and offered her obeisances on the floor below the Vyasasan. He said, no, come here. And he pulled her up, and he put her head right in his lap. And he just began rubbing her head. And he was saying, you have done very well. You have done very, very well. Thank you so much. So I find this story really, really charming. And then there's another story I thought of in this connection, that even the voice of a little girl, little Vaishnavi, was honored by Srila Prabhupada when he was visiting the Dallas temple during the days when the original Gurukula was there. So one morning, Srila Prabhupada was speaking on Srimad Bhagavatam during the morning class when this little girl began to cry. And so her teacher took her out of the temple room and put her in another classroom down the hall by herself in a corner and told her, you stay there. And then the teacher just went right back into the Srimad Bhagavatam class to listen to Srila Prabhupada's lecture. And after Srila Prabhupada finished speaking, he walked out of the temple room, down the hall, right into that classroom where that little girl had, in such an impersonal way, really, that little girl had been placed in that classroom by herself. And she had fallen asleep in the corner. And when she felt Srila Prabhupada's presence, she just jumped up and said, oh, Prabhupada, Prabhupada. And she was so excited. Srila Prabhupada walked right up to her. He was stroking her hair and encouraging her and speaking kind words to her. And, that teacher, I think, received such a lesson that day in how to love and how to teach and how to honor the cry of a little Vaishnavi. And to me, this is radical compassion. This is radical personalism being exemplified by Srila Prabhupada. And I think we need this to uplift our ISKCON culture today. And, you know, I was thinking also, Jesus Christ said, as you do unto the least of these, you do unto me. You know, so we might think, oh, I can be very respectful to the senior devotees or to my guru or whatever. But the way I treat the checkout person in the grocery store, or the elevator operator, or, you know, some little insignificant child, that doesn't matter. No, that's not true. Every voice needs to be honored and encouraged. Yeah.
No, they were beautiful, beautiful pastimes. Thank you so much. I do also apologize if you see Sharadia dipping in and out. The world of modern technology, she has been struggling somewhat, so I've tried to add her back. So we do apologize. That might be causing some sort of distraction for the viewers at home. So our humble apologies. But there were some very beautiful pastimes. Thank you very much for sharing, Rukmini Prabhu, because I've really heard about. The story of the little girl crying in the corner, and it's a very famous pastime of Prabhupada, where then she woke up and then she saw Prabhupada actually giving her that attention that, people often, that little girl reminds me of so many Vaishnavis and women that are not Vaishnavis that often being neglected, either being perceived as, I don't know, not fitting in or being a little bit of a disruption, that Prabhupada didn't see that little girl as a distraction or a disruption, is the kind of moral of the story from there, really,
Yeah,
isn't
and
it?
you know, he really gave such a lesson to that teacher as well, because you know, perhaps the teacher was trying to appear very strict and very fired up or something in front of Srila Prabhupada, but she didn't actually know how to love or how to teach, you know. Why
Mm,
didn't she herself go out and sit with the little girl, you know? So I think it's a really important example that no voice was too small to be heard by Srila Prabhupada.
definitely. Following on from that mood, I read a very beautiful pastime that you once quoted, that you were once in the presence with with a group of devotees, and you were only 16 years, and I'm sure you know where I'm going with this question. And he was looking into the eyes of each and every single devotee, and said, every one of you should open a temple somewhere. And the 16-year-old you went and asked, Prabhupada, even the girls? And then he said, his response was, there is no difference between boys and girls when it comes to teaching Krishna consciousness, which is such a powerful point. But having said that, having seen this, why do you think there's still this gender disparity within the movement, that we see women not always encouraged to give classes, or women giving classes at not the peak times, so to speak? How many ladies give the Sunday evening lecture, selected few? Why have we got to this point within ISKCON where we have this gender disparity, when Prabhupada said there's no difference between boys and girls when it comes to teaching Krishna consciousness? And most importantly, how can we overcome this? Because you were there when this comment was made, so I'm sure you can elaborate and put this into a bit more context for us, please.
Yeah, you know, he did say that to me, and I think it's really true. When we're inspired and when we're engaged in an inspired consciousness. But at another time, he said something else that I think also balances that statement, that I think is important. Once one of the male devotees was saying some disparaging comments towards some of the women, and Srila Prabhupada said, he said, men and women are different. So this is the opposite. You know, sometimes he says the opposite things. That's why we can't have these battles of Srila Prabhupada's quotes, because someone can just pull out a quote where he says the opposite thing. But this to me is valuable. He said, men and women are different. Don't agitate the situation. And I think that's so wise, because, you know, it's wise, and it's an important perspective and an important instruction, because men and women are different. We think differently. We have different issues. We're inspired or discouraged in different ways and by different behaviors. So we have to learn the humility of honoring a diversity of voices different from our own. I think that's so important. And when the roots of humility grow deep, then the tree of bhakti can grow taller and taller. So I think that's a very important thing, to have the humility to honor diverse voices who may hear in different ways, who may appreciate and learn in different ways. And, Srila Prabhupada asked us to meet together each year in Mayapur to discuss how to honor unity and diversity. And we all know that he said that our love for him would be demonstrated by how we cooperate together. So how much are we doing that? And what is our future really if we don't do that? So I think these are important questions to ask ourselves, maybe ask each other in community. Yeah. Welcome back, Saradia. Good to see you.
Hare Krishna, I was having a variety of technical difficulties, but I'm back and I'm very happy to hear what you've been sharing. So a follow-up question that I wanted to ask, on the topic of the importance of maybe honoring the fact that there is, difference, I think not only just between men and women, but there will also be differences between devotees of different generations and devotees coming from different cultural backgrounds and also devotees with different psychophysical natures. So I think on the one hand, we need to acknowledge and honor that, but on the other hand, we still need to be inclusive and value and appreciate everyone. So I've got a question that's got two parts. On the one hand, what do you think is the future of ISKCON if we can succeed in creating a culture in which we do value and uplift the voices of the Vaishnavis? And implicit in that question is, also others. And then on the contrary, what is the risk for the devotee community when the Vaishnavis' perspectives and inputs are overlooked and ignored? I'm specifically interested in this point because I remember being in a meeting in Mayapur. I was just acting as a secretary, but I was there in a very important planning meeting. But all of the devotees that were involved in the planning for the Mayapur project, and it wasn't just the temple, it was the whole Mayapur project, they were all men. And then one thing that came forward is in the entire planning for the whole project, and that was the whole community, there was no provision made for children. The existing schools were already there, but there was no additional planning made, although they were saying that so many more thousands of people are going to come to Mayapur and live there and visit. No provision whatsoever was made for children at all,
Mm-hmm.
which as a teacher, I found, very shocking.
Mm-hmm.
So that gave me like a glimpse into what happens, if women are not included. But I think you might have many more insights. So, on the one hand, what is the future if we do value and uplift the voices of women? On the other hand, what are the risks that the devotee community potentially is going to run into when we are ignoring the women?
Yeah. So you can see when the voices of women are silenced, then the opportunities for children are also denied. So, that becomes not only 51% of the population, but so many more who are, what is the percentage of the children? I think if we uplift the voices of the Vaishnavis, then our culture will be enriched and balanced. And, what comes to mind for me is can a table stand on two legs? If you have a square or rectangular table, can it stand on two legs? And can a culture flourish when it's deprived of over half its voices? I want to read this quote, this beautiful, lovely quote from the Mahabharata, and I think you have it to show on the screen. Let me begin reading it. I think it speaks to your question, and you can share the screen as well, I think. So this is from Mahabharata. Yes. Women, O king, should always be worshipped and treated with affection. There, where women are treated with respect, the very gods are said to be filled with joy. There, where women are not worshipped, all acts become fruitless. If the women of a family, in consequence of the treatment they receive, grieve and shed tears, that family soon becomes extinct. Wow, strong words, right? Those houses that are cursed by women meet with destruction and ruin, as if scorched by some rite. Such houses lose their splendor, their growth and prosperity cease. Persons who desire affluence and prosperity should honor women. By cherishing women, O Bharata, one cherishes the goddess of prosperity herself and by afflicting them, one is said to afflict the goddess of prosperity. So it almost makes you wonder, maybe some of the problems we're having in ISKCON today are maybe due to some of the harm and silencing of some of the Vaishnavis. Sometimes men will say, oh, women are so emotional. But, our emotions are messengers of our souls. And we're supposed to approach Lord Krishna with bhava, with spiritual emotion, with wise, open hearts. And Bhagavad Gita says, Buddha bhava samanvita, that we can't, that wise emotion is the way to approach Krishna, with a wise emotion of the heart. We can't live only in the head space. We need to open our hearts to deep Krishna consciousness, entering the heart through the agency of enlightened emotions. And we may know so many shlokas, but if that knowledge doesn't sink deeply down into our hearts, then our chanting may just become like an imitation of like a trained parrot who will just squawk when threatened with death or danger. So the question is, this is my roundabout answer, right? So the question is, what will be our future? So a beautiful story comes to mind. This is my most favorite story of Srila Prabhupada. He was asked by a very young disciple, how can I serve you, Srila Prabhupada? And Srila Prabhupada just shot back at him. He said, you can go where I will not go. And this devotee was so shocked. This young devotee was so shocked, and he was bewildered because Prabhupada was going everywhere. He'd just come from Japan, San Francisco, Texas, Chicago, New York. Now he's at New Vrindavan. Next, he's heading to London and Germany. And so he was so bewildered that, well, Srila Prabhupada, where is it that you won't go? And Srila Prabhupada said, to the future, to the future. And by the way you treat the people there, they will know how much Krishna loves them. So I find this such an urgently important instruction of Srila Prabhupada. If we're thinking of what will be the future, show the people of the future how much Krishna loves them by the way you treat them. So in an atmosphere where we show the people of the future how much Krishna loves them by how we treat them, how we honor them, how much we deeply hear them and honor their needs, meeting each one of them where they are and helping them to take the next step in their Krishna consciousness, then they will feel Krishna's love through us. And this is, again, radical personalism that will touch and transform people's hearts. Srila Prabhupada says in one place in the Nectar of Instruction, in one of his purports, he says that he established, why did he make this ISKCON society? He says that he established the ISKCON society in order to facilitate the 6 loving exchanges between devotees. Then he says, and if an ordinary person gets the chance to associate with such loving devotees, then he will certainly develop his dormant Krishna consciousness. So I think this can be the future if we show the people of the future how much Krishna loves them by the way we treat them. I mean, so often, have you ever been at a Sunday program and you sit down with a guest and you say, oh, have you ever been here before? And so it always pains the heart when someone says, oh yeah, I was here 6 years ago, but nobody talked to me. So I haven't been back since, or something like that. So, we have to really honor the personhood of each and every living being as though they're Krishna's special guests when they enter the door of one of our temples. They're Krishna's special invited guests. And I think this has to be our future. Otherwise, our future is dismal. Yeah.
And if I may just make a comment about the beautiful verse from Mahabharata you just read, which I think the point, there was a point where it's read that where women are not worshipped and treated, I think, with affection. And something along them lines, I think there is this idea, or almost, despite there being a divine feminine and a divine masculine. For some reason, it seems to be that there's a divine masculine. The men are revered, men are, the Prabhus take front, it's center stage sort of thing. And I think by doing that, it's just like you said, it's just the point about biodiversity. By doing that, we as a society are missing out on the other half, isn't it? It's the world is made out of divine feminine and masculine. And I think that little quote from Mahabharata so beautifully illustrates why it's important for men and women to both be. And it's not just saying everybody should just worship women or men. It should be the reverence, and that love and respect should be reciprocated by both genders towards each other. And it's just that mutual respect and love that helps sustain a positive and healthy society. I think that was such a beautiful quote.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true, that, exploitation, discrimination, these are qualities of the modes of ignorance and passion. We have to weed those traits out of our character and really become transparent to hear the voice of Krishna in our own hearts, become transparent to be uplifted by the mode of goodness. Yeah. Thank you.
So, Prabhu, I've heard you share this very beautiful pastime of Srila Prabhupada, which I find, yeah, it really touches my heart, where, Prabhupada was saying that the one place that he cannot go is the future, and we should go there, and we should make people understand how much Krishna loves them. And you were also speaking upon the importance of when a guest, comes to the temple, to really give that personal attention. But I've also been thinking that if we have a culture, as which I think Prabhupada did really embody, of a culture of, as you call it, radical personalism, radical, inclusion, then, I think the devotee community, if there is so much love and care, for each other, then automatically people would want to be part of it. If we have such a community, we wouldn't even need to go out there and tell people to join. They would just want to join, because everyone is looking ultimately for community. However, I mean, not everywhere, but many places we see that that is not happening. We see that especially women are so often overlooked, just put at the back, not included, especially when it comes to, say, community issues. So why do you think is that happening? Why do we have this tendency to exclude and silence and overlook women?
Yeah. There's a pyramid of power in our culture that's dominated by the voices of men. And those are men who haven't heard or imbibed the mood of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Men who are spiritually advanced have developed what are often called the soft or more feminine qualities. And Lord Chaitanya has given us another perspective, and he's inverted that pyramid of power. He's asked us to place the humility of grass and the tolerance and forbearance of trees at the top of that pyramid, and placing ourselves in all humility below, offering all respects to others. And I think that instruction of Lord Chaitanya is world changing, it's culture changing, and it's transformational within our hearts if we can only follow his instruction. So, this is a transformational instruction for our society. Very, very important. And there's so many examples in our Shastra also. I think you were going to ask me about the examples of women's voices being honored in our scriptures also. There's so many examples of that. There's the story of when Arjuna brought Draupadi back from winning her in her Swayamvara. And he calls out to his mother, "Mother, I've brought a great treasure." And then Kunti Devi immediately says, "Well, then share it equally with your brothers." And so her voice was dharmic law. Her voice was truth that could not be disobeyed. Okay, share her equally with your brothers. Then she became the wife of all 5 of them, astoundingly enough, right? And the great Kunti Devi, I mean, she's my absolute favorite patron saint in all the whole Bhagavatam. But Srila Prabhupada would chant her beautiful prayers when he was ill, or when there were troubles in the society. He would he would uplift her voice. And, then I was thinking also in the first canto of Srimad Bhagavatam, Draupadi, her voice is, given as much credibility as the voice of Bhima in that story of Ashvatthama, right? Draupadi had her compassionate opinion. Bhimasena wanted him killed. And so both their voices were being honored by Lord Krishna. Yeah. There's a story of Srila Prabhupada's guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. He was once, after a Gaur Purnima festival, he was speaking at a massive gathering of his disciples. He was on his veranda, and there were, maybe thousands of devotees there. And he began to talk about the desire of his mother. His father had departed at that point. So he said, it is the desire of my mother that the wishes of my father Bhakti Vinod Thakur be fulfilled. And that was the time when he requested his disciples to go to the West. And so actually there's a beautiful story that Mula Prakriti tells in a book she wrote about, where she interviewed many of the people who knew Srila Prabhupada in the early days. So Bhaktisiddhanta began to look out in this crowd, and then he was focusing on our Srila Prabhupada, who was called Abhay Babu at that time. He was a householder. And this is a little bit of a tangent, but I think it's beautiful. So the devotee sitting right in front of him began to panic. He thought Bhaktisiddhanta was looking at him, that he wants me to go to the West. Oh, no, I can't do it. But then he realized that Bhaktisiddhanta's gaze was strongly fixed on the devotee behind him, and that was Abhay Babu, our Srila Prabhupada. And also Srila Bhaktisiddhanta, he wrote that he wanted a Vaishnavi ashram established in Mayapur. Isn't that amazing? And then what about Sita Devi? When she was being abducted by Ravana, she was so boldly speaking, as they say, speaking truth to power. She was speaking truth to power, telling him what would be his future, what would be his fate if he kidnapped her. And then even his own wife, the wife of Ravana is considered one of the great Vedic ladies. And she was also telling him, speaking to her evil, powerful husband, speaking the truth to him, what will happen to you if because you've abducted Sita. And then there's the story of Chintamani, the prostitute, who spoke the truth to Vilva Mangala Thakur when she chastised him, telling him, if you only had so much love for Krishna, it's a long story, right? If you only had so much love for Krishna, he came to see her on this terrible stormy night, fording a river and crossing the storm. And so she said, if you only had so much love for Krishna, then your life would be different. So then because of her truth, because she spoke the truth to him, his whole life changed. And he accepted her as his guru. And if you read, the Krishna Karnamrita was one of the most favorite books of Lord Chaitanya. And if you read the very first verses, he offers his respects to his other guru, Samagiri, I think his name was, but also to the prostitute Chintamani, who gave him that instruction. And then, I don't know if you know this, but in the earliest Upanishad that was written, there's a great woman philosopher named Gargi, she challenged the sage Yajnavalkya in the court of King Janaka. So this is the ancient times. This is in the Tretya Yuga. And she was a lifelong celibate, and she was known as a Brahmavadini, or knower of Brahman. And then, I often think that one of the most technical parts of the Bhagavatam is spoken to the great Devahuti by her son, Kapiladev, And then, of course, the pure devotee wives of the Yajnik Brahmanas were so celebrated. Their proud husbands were cursing themselves because of their pride and their high position in Varnashram and following the Karma Kandya rituals. And, Lord Chaitanya celebrated the Vrajagopis as the greatest devotees of Lord Krishna. And their songs in the 10th canto are really the perfection of prayer. And then we have in more recent times, like 400 or 500 years ago, Janava Devi, the wife of Lord Nityananda, Sita Thakurani, the wife of Advaita Acharya, as well as Ganga Mata Goswamini, were all initiating gurus, as well as the wife and daughter of Srinivasacharya, Gauranga Priya, and Hemalata Thakurani, and there were others. So in so many instances, the voices of the women are heard and honored. But they shine because of their own dharmic qualities, their own practice, their own effulgent, vibrant practice of bhakti. Because by that practice, they shine and they rise, and then that descending grace comes down to empower them. So that coupling of the personal practice and then that descending grace, I think, is essential and important.
Thank you so much, Rukmini Prabhu. I think you shared a whole vast list of examples in Shastra, and I think we could list so many more. Where sometimes women might not have been directly in the leadership position. If we, for instance, look at the position of Queen Kunti, but nonetheless, their opinions were very much valued, and I found it very interesting in the Mahabharata. So many times when there's crucial decisions that need to be made, it's the women that actually take charge and make decisions. So I find that very fascinating. And I think what you made very clear is that if we see that that is not happening, it is actually a misrepresentation of our Vaishnava culture.
Yes.
It is not Vaishnava culture to exclude women or to think that they need to be limited in some other capacity where they're not allowed to contribute. But on the other hand, I think what you also made clear is that Vaishnava culture, just because you are a woman, it doesn't necessarily say that, okay, you're a woman, so now you've got the right to speak, or you're a man, now you've got the right to speak. But it is those that are dharmic and those that are in line with the will of Krishna.
Yes.
They can really make the most meaningful contributions. But that doesn't really depend on whether you're a man or a woman.
Yes.
But I think
you're reminding me of a beautiful story of Sita and Ram. She was traveling perhaps back to Ayodhya, and she was in a palanquin, all, with the curtains around the palanquin, and she was inside. And the common people wanted to see her as her palanquins. I don't know if you've heard this one before. The common people wanted to see her, and she didn't know what to do. And so Ram said, "Let them see you." And then he explained something really profound. He said, a woman is not protected by her covering. A woman is protected by dharma. So this is very, very important, that we are protected by dharma, by those righteous, shining, effulgent qualities. And by those qualities, our voices will be heard, not just because I'm a loud, strident voice and I'm, out shouting, on the corner or something. But those are the voices that will be heard. And sometimes those are the most quiet voices. And sometimes we have to turn to those quiet, wise people and say, well, what do you think? Have you ever been in a meeting where the most wise person in the group just isn't saying anything, and everybody else is talking? And then at a certain point, the leaders of the group will say, well, what do you think, so-and-so? And then that person will come out with some brilliant perspective that no one even thought of. But if no one else, then maybe that person wouldn't have said anything. And sometimes that happens with men and women. So
that leads on to, I know we've got, it's been a beautiful discussion. I'm sure we'd both happily sit and talk to you for hours and hours, but I'm conscious of time. But I think one question I wanted to put to you, which is very much related to the point you made just now, really, before we actually go on to some questions from our audience members that's listening to us. We've got lots of comments and questions today, so we'd like to give them some time to get those questions and comments heard. But before we go do that, just we've talked a lot about during the session how it is important for the voices to be heard, but for us to, in order for us to be able to hear somebody's voice, we need to be able to genuinely listen to them. That's why one of the first actions of bhakti is, it's shravanam kirtanam. It's not kirtanam shravanam, is it?
that's right.
So it's shravanam kirtanam. So what can we do to become better listeners? But this is not gender specific, so what can we all do as a collective to become better listeners?
Yes. I think it goes back to our essential instruction from Lord Chaitanya, that someone who's humble can open her heart to honor and deeply hear others. And what is deep listening? What does it mean? Deep listening means to be open to hear from those who are different from ourselves, right? And to be open to being changed by what we hear, right? Our society, again, I think our society is crippled by a monoculture that denies the voices of marginalized people and the women. And if we look at the word heart, in the middle of the word heart is the word ear, right? So if we open our hearts, we need to deeply hear. We're always told to hear from Sadhu, Shastra, Guru, to hear from the holy people, to hear from our gurus, to hear from our scriptures. But we need to also hear from the smallest people as well. And this type of deep hearing can really transform our hearts. And I think this consciousness can attract the hearts of others to join us as well. To deeply hear and to be willing to be changed by what we hear. Not be so rigidly frozen in my opinions. So often when we're talking to another person, we're just waiting for the other person to stop talking so we can give them a piece of my mind. Maybe they don't want a piece of my mind. Maybe they want to be heard. Maybe they need to be heard. So,
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful, beautiful response. So I don't know, Sharade, if you had any reflections on that or if you wanted to pick up. I need to certainly troll through the comments we've had to pick some comments. So we do apologize humbly if we don't pick your comment or question, but we do really appreciate all your input and all your engagement.
Can I share a little something else?
Of course.
Because there was one question that we discussed that didn't come up, and I think it's really important that sometimes, sometimes in our society, I think, one of you was asking me about this. So sometimes there's, that I'm so junior, and the seniors are given so much respect, and what does my voice matter, and can I even speak out, or do I even matter? So I think this is maybe an important for me to give one more thought on this point, that sometimes there is a power dynamic and a power differentiation that's unhealthy in our ISKCON society. And to me, this is a misuse of the idea behind Vaishnava etiquette. And sometimes instructions are deployed actually in harmful ways. And those who are actually senior, those who are actually advanced, should be the most eager to offer respect to others. And I also wanted to make this point that someone may join us who has gifts given to them by Krishna. Like maybe you two are examples of that. Gifts given by Krishna that are very different from our own, And there are infinite numbers of living beings with infinite and unique qualities and abilities, and each one is as unique as a snowflake. Have you ever not heard this? That one farmer in Vermont, where it's freezing and snowing all the time, he looked under a microscope and studied snowflakes. Every single snowflake that has ever fallen from the sky is different from every other snowflake. So our qualities are unique like that. And so, I was thinking that maybe a new person comes with certain skills or inspirations to serve Krishna in ways that we haven't seen before. And Srila Prabhupada said that devotee service should be encouraged as individual, spontaneous, and voluntary. And his guru, Srila Bhakti Siddhanta, also warned that institutions have a tendency to kill the individual spirit of the devotee. And yet he worked so hard to create and maintain the vibrancy of his institution. So, and then one other thing comes to mind, that the poet Rumi said that there are innumerable ways to bow down and kiss the ground. I love that. So, as Vaishnavis, we're all sisters, and often we can learn the most from our most junior sister. And if I think I know so much, where is the space in my heart for me to grow? And if I'm grateful to hear each and every voice, then pride will not grow in my heart. And just let me close with this one little thought about that gratitude. That gratitude is the soil in which pride does not easily grow. Gratitude is a soil in which pride does not easily grow. So thank you all so much for letting me share these thoughts. I'm eager to hear from your listeners.
Hare Krishna Rukmini Prabhu, thank you so much. We already have had a request for there being a part 2. So I am assuming that the Vaishnavis are very eager to hear from you. I definitely am as well. And I think what I really appreciated from what you were now sharing is that we also have to remember that, of course, we can understand from the externals, who is junior and who is senior. We can know who has, been initiated first and who is older or younger. But we cannot actually know the depth of anyone's devotion. Someone might come to the temple for the first time, but we don't know how many lifetimes they've been practicing. And also, we don't know who they are in the spiritual world. We don't know who they'll become in the future. So I think that's, it's so important to keep that in mind. And on the other hand, as you said, if we are humble, we can learn from everyone and everything and every situation. So if we are really humble, if we are really advanced, it means that we should be, as you said, always eager to hear and to think that everyone can potentially be my teacher. So I would just like to, before we get to the questions, I'll just briefly want to mention one pastime which I find illustrates, what you said about if you are advanced, you'll listen. There's this beautiful story. I'm not sure exactly where it's from, but there's a story of a lady called Savitri whose husband was actually cursed to die. And when Yamaraj, came to took her husband, I won't go into all the details, but she kept on following Yamaraj. And then after following him for some time, he turned around and he asked her what she wanted. And then she explained, according to Dharma, someone that has walked a certain amount of steps with you is considered a friend. And, and then she explained, why. And Dharmaraj is very pleased with her devotion, also because she had known that her husband was cursed to have died in a very short period of time, but she still decided to marry him because she had decided that she'd already given her heart to this individual. And then what is very interesting is Yamaraj completely honored her wishes. And one thing he said is, you can ask for anything, but you cannot ask for your husband back, your husband's life back. And she agreed to that, but then she asked for Yamaraj. One of the things she asked was, I think she asked for 100 sons. And then Yamaraj said, you may have 100 sons. And then he was about to leave, but he saw she was still standing there. And he said, but I've given you so many boons already. Why are you waiting? And then she said, well, I'm a chaste woman. How should I have 100 sons, without my husband? And yet Yamaraj smiled upon her, and then he actually granted her that wish, and he brought her husband back to life. So I find it's a fascinating story because she wasn't a very important person, but she was a dharmic woman. She was a pious woman. She was a dedicated and a devoted woman. And because of that, the Lord of Death, Yamaraj himself, was willing to listen to her and to bless her and to actually, give her her heart's desire, which was her husband's life back. And she saved her husband. So I think that is a beautiful story that illustrates so many points that
I
you
love
have
it when you tell
shared
stories.
to me.
You're such a beautiful storyteller.
Thank you, Prabhu.
That was so beautiful.
Thank you so much.
Such an important story. Thank you.
So we have quite a couple of questions from our audience. We just want to acknowledge that we've seen all the questions. I'm not sure we'll have time to answer all of them, but Rukmini Prabhu, if you are happy to answer some of them, we can share them with you.
Sure, absolutely. I can try my best.
All right, so we've got one here from Michelle and Stanford. I think you might know her. She's got a couple of questions, but one of her questions are: what role do you think our society's leaders should play in uplifting and supporting the voices, concerns, and the cries of the women along? Okay, I think that's basically the question. Okay, so what role should the leaders play in our society for uplifting and supporting the voices of women?
Well, I think if they have a broad perspective, they'll see that there are many services that can be fulfilled without sort of stereotype considerations. I know, here in the area where I live, we have, in the US, I think we have 6 or 7 women temple presidents. and they're doing fantastic jobs. So, people have different gifts, and when we kind of step out of that stereotypical or in the box thinking, we can see that, men and women have so many different abilities, and our society can be so enriched. So, we have to believe in. I was thinking when you were telling that story. Have you ever heard this saying that, or maybe it was just before you told that story, that every saint has her past, and every sinner has her future. So, to be able to see what are the capabilities, and to also hear the ideas that someone may be sharing, of some new idea of how Krishna can be served in some dynamic way that maybe we haven't thought of before. So to not be stereotyped, and to really open our hearts to hear, well, what are your ideas, and what are your aspirations for serving Krishna? How can we take it into the future in ways that we haven't seen in the past? So, yeah, I think that it's all a virtue of humility, I think.
Thank you so much, Prabhu. I think that's so key, because I think Prabhupada didn't have stereotypical ideas of what any devotee should be or what they can contribute. I remember reading one pastime where Prabhupada was going to give initiation, and then the devotees brought a lady to Prabhupada who he had never met, and she hadn't actually been living in the temple or anything, and she was some type of TV personality, and apparently she had very big hair, and her hair was kind of like, made in some big fashion on top of her head. But she came to Prabhupada and she said that she wanted initiation, and then Prabhupada asked the devotees, is she chanting? And she said she's chanting 16 rounds. She's following the four regulative principles, and she was still continuing her work, but she wanted initiation. And then Prabhupada gave this lady initiation, and he called her, I think, Meru Devi, of the Mount Meru. And I found it was so, but it was, for me, it was like it's so humorous, but it's also showing how Prabhupada is so like inclusive. Like he didn't expect her to change her hair or her appearance, or do the kind of traditional like sari and cover the hair, and he just kind of embraced her.
Yeah, it's
And
so
then
funny you mentioned that. You both are from South Africa and the UK, but in the US and in Texas, they say the higher the hair, the closer to God.
I think that's a very important point there, because I think another perception, particularly amongst women, you made the point where Lord Ram said women is protected by Dharma. The protection comes from the Dharma, but there's this perception that it's a question that I get sometimes, you just don't, I've literally had people say, you don't look like a devotee, or, because if you're not in a sari, or, it's just, I think these kind of people need to, it's just that, like, if Prabhupada could appreciate this Mary Devi and her hair, I'm sure devotees can appreciate that other devotees come in all shapes, sizes, colors and forms and attires, frankly. So I think it was such a powerful point.
It's
Conscious of
beautiful.
the time, and we've got lots of questions, but there's one question from Angel the guide. She's asking us, what books or lectures or conversations do you suggest we look at for more on this topic and our beloved pure Vaishnavi from our traditional, and also maybe in other interfaith bhakti?
Nice question. Thank you. Well, I love the book by Vishaka Devi. And I think, Angel, I think you're from New York, and I know you. And you might have been in some of those Urban Devi sessions where we worked with Vishaka's book. But where do I have it right here? It's 5 years, 11 months, and a lifetime of unexpected love. I think Vishaka is so chaste to Srila Prabhupada's teachings, but yet she's just blows open so many stereotypes, and tells things so truly with so much wisdom. I love that book. There's another beautiful book called Srila Prabhupada and His Daughters. That's a beautiful book with so many wonderful stories that Vaishnavis have shared. Both those books I think are wonderful. I was just thinking of one story from that book where there was a man and his wife, she was from Japan, and Srila Prabhupada, they came up to him for initiation in Los Angeles, and Prabhupada, hearing that she was from Japan, she hardly spoke English, and Prabhupada said, "Oh, you should go to Tokyo and become the temple president." And she thought he was joking, but Srila Prabhupada said that, you both go to Tokyo and she should become the temple president. So many wonderful stories are there in those books. I would recommend. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think I would add to that. It's not one book, but it's a collection. If you go online and you look for Prabhupada memories, and then you read the Prabhupada memories of his lady disciples, I think that will also, give you a very a very enriching understanding of how Prabhupada related, with ladies. And there's also one pastime which I found very interesting, where Prabhupada told a gentleman in Vrindavan that he should give a class in Hindi to the local people. He said, "You should give a Bhagavad Gita class." And then he said to Prabhupada, "Actually, I don't speak so well, but my wife, she gives very good lectures." And then Prabhupada said, "Then she should speak."
Yes. You're reminding me of another pastime in Delhi, when the temple president, I won't say his name at that time, but he was saying to Prabhupada, "My wife just won't listen to me." And Prabhupada said, "Then you should listen to her. She's a very intelligent girl. You listen to her."
Yes, I think again and again we see that Prabhupada really looked at the qualification of the individual devotee, and not, it wasn't limited to, the gender or the background, of the person. Rukmini Prabhu, I'm just looking, there's a whole collection of questions. I'm looking through them, and there's one from Kaminia that really, I think, stands out, which I'd like to ask you. And she says, "I have noticed a pervasive culture of withholding affection within our spiritual society. Where do we think this stems from? Because it breaks my heart."
I'm not understanding affection or fiction.
Yes, withholding affection.
Withholding affection, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I think sometimes we try to be on a platform higher than where we actually are, and sometimes it's very artificial. We try to become detached. We read Krishna's instructions in Bhagavad Gita about the wisdom of being detached. But, we have to understand our own position and take step by step, gradually, not try to imitate others that are, in ways that are beyond our realization. And in fact, Lord Chaitanya was very encouraging. Srila Prabhupada was also encouraging to his householders. Lord Chaitanya was encouraging to his householders, and even to the point of naming the babies. But he tended to be very strict with the sannyasis. So we should be in our place of strength and take each step gradually, and don't stuff our emotions down, because as I said earlier, the emotions are messengers from the soul. So when we have those emotional feelings, we have to look at them, take a microscope, and look carefully. What is this messenger telling me, as opposed to artificially stuffing it down. And then what happens is we go into this artificial headspace, which is not grounded. It's like a balloon that doesn't, that's not grounded on the earth. So both need to be there. The head and the heart have to be balanced. Thank you. Great question from you.
We have another question from Krishna Kids with Andrea. She says, "How can those of us in ISKCON now help bring value to Vaishnavi voices?"
Yeah, well, I think Andrea, Paula Andrea, you're a great example. Um, teaching, like, you speak Spanish. You started teaching a group of Spanish-speaking women. You're concerned about the children, so you started this Krishna Kids, and just what is in your heart. What is in my capacity. What are you inspired to do? I often think about. I have some friends in Mumbai, a beautiful family, and they have two daughters. One daughter is blissfully happy being married with a couple of kids, and her younger sister has every ambition to become the Prime Minister of India. She's in law school. She intends to clerk for the Supreme Court, and she has the highest ambition to become the Prime Minister of India. So both of those aspirations have to be honored as, sacred individuals, because these gifts that we have are God-given, and if we don't use them for God, then they will destroy us. If we just stuff them down, our desires, our aspirations to serve, they will be destructive. And yeah, there's a beautiful something from Mother Teresa where she said, this is in so much humility. She said, we think, speaking of herself and her sisters, that we think that whatever we're doing are just little drops in the ocean. But without our drops, without those tiny drops, the ocean would be that much less. So I think we have to honor our own sacred gifts and express them, and not be intimidated when someone says, "Oh, you can't do that. You're this or that. You're not initiated, or you're a woman, or you're whatever." We have to honor those gifts. Otherwise, Krishna's glories, the ocean will be that much less, right? Without those little drops.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Prabhu. There's one other quote from Mother Teresa which I really like, where she said that we can't all do great things, but we can all do small things with great love.
Beautiful.
I think that's so beautiful. And when she really was I think, embodied the mood of servanthood.
Yes.
She was such a servant. And I was also thinking, often we have this, I think, almost like a double standard. On the one hand, we sometimes in our society see that women are not encouraged to, for instance, pursue certain career ambitions that they might have. But on the other hand, I've seen that when we have ladies, like in Cape Town, we've got one lady that is quite high up in the government. And that has proven to be so useful for the Cape Town Temple, because whenever they're running into, governmental legal issues, they need this lady's help and support. And in the same way, we've got so many devotees, in the UK who are ladies, who are doctors, who are psychiatrists, etc. And when the devotee community need help, they want to turn to those ladies.
Yes.
So I think we can see that even if a lady just has great material ambition, we can still see that as long as she's a devotee, it will ultimately, benefit everyone if she's encouraged to, to pursue her nature.
Yes.
And use her gifts to serve Krishna. So I think that's so important. As you said, we should see what the individuals can offer and see how we can empower them.
Yeah, we hear devotees speak so much about varnashram, but what is varnashram if it's not doing what you do, doing what you love to do as an offering for Krishna? And you reminded me of something else when you just spoke about those ladies in the UK. When Prabhupada was wanting to go to the West, and he knew, so many industrialists, so many great sadhus, so many holy people. But when you think about it, who was the one person who helped him get to New York? None of his godbrothers, none of those big industrialists, none of the great sadhus of Vrindavan. It was Sumati Morarji. She was the one. So we never really hear about that here's a woman who helped Srila Prabhupada come to us in the West when others were, it kind of reminds you of the story of Chicken Little. Oh, who's going to help me bake this cake? Oh, not me, not me. Well, who will help me eat this cake? Then after Prabhupada is successful, then people are saying, oh, yes, I knew Swami Prabhupada, and, all of that. So, yeah, it was a woman who helped Srila Prabhupada get to the West.
Mm. And I think just to add to that briefly, also when Prabhupada firstly arrived, I mean, he stayed with, I think, a contact of his, but I remember the lady's name, Sally Agrawal. And Sally Agrawal had great appreciation for Prabhupada in her own, in her own way. And it sounded like, of that whole family, it sounded like she actually had the most interaction and affection.
And just imagine, just imagine Prabhupada's visiting their house in the evening after they've cooked. She's cooked meat for their dinner, and then Prabhupada comes after dinner, and the house smells like the meat that she's just cooked. And he's got his vegetables in her refrigerator because he has, he's just staying in some kind of YMCA office space or something. And And she said, and she says, oh, the smells in the house must be offensive to you. And he's keeping his vegetables right in her fridge with probably the cat food or dog food and all of her meat. And he just says, oh, think nothing of it. I mean, imagine that. He says, think nothing of it. So kind, so broad-minded, so encouraging. And she loved him for that. She missed him actually so much after he left. She loved him. And her little daughter called him Swami Jesus.
Yes, and she gave that, I think, iconic statement where she said that when Swamiji smiled, it was oceanic.
Oh, I love that. Beautiful.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Rukmini Prabhu, we're very sad that we have almost run out of time with you. Still many questions, I think. Definitely there is a desire for you to come back and to share more again with us. So many stories and so many insights, I think, that you have. But I'm aware there was one particular pastime that we still really wanted to hear from you, and we do still have some time for you to share that particular pastime, which I think really shows how Prabhupada valued and appreciated every contribution from every devotee.
Beautiful. Yeah, I wanted to share this story because you've called this podcast series Many Moons. So there was a time when I was serving in New York, and the first temple was the 26 Second Avenue Temple, the little tiny storefront that was the first temple. But after some time, the devotees acquired another storefront. Prabhupada was traveling, I believe he was in Europe, he was away for a long time, and the leaders of the community were writing to Prabhupada that we got this new temple and you're gonna love it, Prabhupada. It's just like a palace. And I was thinking, oh no, because the new temple that they got was also a storefront, but it was just a little bit bigger and a little bit nicer. It had been a tuxedo shop. So it had mirrors around the walls. It was a little spiffy. And so I thought, oh, what's Prabhupada going to say? What's he going to think? Is he going to be angry when he comes and he sees that this new temple is not at all a palace? It's just another storefront. So I was really worried and really apprehensive. So Srila Prabhupada eventually comes back to New York. He walked into this temple, 61 Second Avenue, just a few blocks up from 26 Second Avenue. He walks into this new temple and he's just looking all around. And then he just sat down on his Vyasa-san. And he said, so beautifully, he said, I prayed to Krishna to send me one moon. He said, I did not want so many stars. I just prayed to Krishna to send me one moon. But Krishna has sent me so many moon-like boys and girls. So this was his appreciation of our tiny, broken, haphazard, crazy, mistaken efforts. So, yeah. This is the appreciation. So we need to go off into the future and appreciate each other and ourselves and others. Carry that mood.
Thank you so much, Rukmini Prabhu. And I think what is extraordinary about the culture of bhakti is that in our sky, there's only one moon. And I mean, there's only one moon in each little solar system. But in the bhakti sky, there can be unlimited moons. There's always space, for one more moon. And I think we should think about that as well. It's not that if someone else becomes a moon, I can't be a moon, but we should meditate, how can I help others to become moons?
Yes.
And that will
we're just coming up to Gaur Purnima, and Lord Chaitanya and Lord Nityananda are the sun and the moon rising in the sky simultaneously. So these are our worshipful lords. So let's honor them, honor each other to also shine to our utmost capacity in their service. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Rukmini Prabhu, and thank you for all of the devotees that have joined us on Facebook and of YouTube. We really appreciate and value your participation. We do acknowledge we haven't been able to get to all the questions, but we do appreciate your questions and your comments, and we can always continue the discussion, in the comment section on Facebook afterwards. And please do look out for our next session. We're back next week already, and we're going to have Chitti Shakti, and she's going to speak about the saintly women in Gora Lila. So I think it's going to be another fascinating session. There's so many wonderful, inspiring pastimes we will be sharing, and we are also hoping that Rukmini Prabhu will be back with us again soon.
Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Thank you for all your lovely comments. Sorry we couldn't get to it, like Shraddha mentioned, but do join us next week. And thank you ever so much, Rukmini Prabhu. Your stories are always delightful and inspiring, and it's been a truly, truly, truly wonderful session. And we're absolutely privileged and honored that you decided to give your very valuable time. I know you're a busy lady. Very valuable time to our little project. So thank you everyone, everybody for joining us, and have a lovely rest of the evening. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.